Excellent. Everyone should have just seen on their screen a notification that this meeting is now being recorded. As a reminder that this recording is available publicly. It is hosted on the jeffreyspoint.org website and is also available on YouTube. You are not required to appear on the camera. You can keep your camera off, your personal camera off. You may change your name as it is displayed, and you may submit questions through the chat. As a reminder, the rules regarding speaking at planning and zoning meetings have recently changed. Everyone is allowed to speak as time allows. So we ask everyone to be respectful about the length of their comments and questions so that we can get to as many people as possible. We will prioritize abutters by having them go first. My name is Margaret Farmer, and I am co-chair of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Bloomerth, and I am the other co-chair of the Jeffreys Point Neighborhood Association. Susan?
Hi, I'm Susan Huang. I'm the vice chair. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Pike. I am the treasurer.
Hey, I'm Josh Schmidt. I'm the secretary. Oh, no. It's fine,
Sorry, Josh.
Andrew.
I muted myself before I said your name.
I was gonna say, you didn't introduce Josh. Rude.
No worries. Margaret.
Okay, thank you very much. We do not have any announcements at this time, but we reserve the right to make announcements later on. As a reminder, you will be left on mute while there is a presentation. Slides will be controlled by Rachel Bloomerth this evening, who is our co-chair. You do not have to wait until a presentation is completed in order to submit questions through the chat. I now have to go back to less than full screen so I can read the description. This is the first, we're starting this evening with 270 Sumner Street. This is a first presentation at the Planning and Zoning Committee. The proposal is to rehabilitate an existing dwelling, including a rear addition, add a roof deck exclusive to Unit 3, add rear decks for green space, and add one parking space to the rear. The developer is Evandro DaSilva. They're represented by attorney Richard Lynds this evening. And if you could also clarify who is the owner of the property, that would be appreciated, Richard. And take it away.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Good evening, and good evening to the members of the committee. For the record, I'm Richard Lynds with the business address of 245 Sumner Street here in East Boston on behalf of Evandro DaSilva, who is the owner of the property as well. We also have Sharon Gentges from Joy Street Design, who is the project architect, and we will run through the slide deck. I believe it's our first presentation, although we just concluded our abutters meeting. I didn't even realize they were on for the same evening, so I apologize. I would have updated the slide accordingly, but just real quick overview. The members of the Planning and Zoning Subcommittee may remember this project. It did go through a process where we originally intended to change the occupancy of this building from 3 to 4 units and proposed a vertical and rear addition as well. That was taken to the Board of Appeal, and not unlike the project immediately adjacent, which you can actually see in the screen at 272 Sumner, that is either nearing completion or just about complete. The zoning board decided to deny that request, and we've gone back to the planning process for this project. So tonight, although this is our first presentation for this project, I just want to be clear that this has already been through a community process for a different project, that we've agreed to change. So with that, if we can jump to the next slide, I'll run through the deck and answer any questions at the end. So this is a pre-existing 3-unit dwelling. Our proposal would involve the construction of a rear addition while maintaining the occupancy as 3 units. So we're no longer looking to change the occupancy from 3 to 4 units. This will remain a 3-family dwelling, which has a number of implications for purposes of the zoning and the relief that would be necessary. And I'll walk through that in a moment. These are all 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and they range in size from anywhere from about 1,000 to about 1,150 square feet. Because of the extent of the renovations that are involved, this will also include a complete upgrade to the life safety. This project is intended for home ownership, so this would be a condo building upon completion. Next slide, please. I think I might have included the wrong slide. I don't know if this is the correct slide. It actually is the same neighborhood. I think this was from a different project, but nevertheless, it is a 3F 2000 district. I usually include this slide just so that we can understand what overlays are involved as well as what sub-district. If we jump to the next slide, you have the zoning summary for the 3F 2000 as well. So our proposed use, as I indicated, is 3 units. That is an allowed use in the 3F district, so there is no zoning relief necessary. We do have 83 square feet more than the minimum lot size. So because this is an existing condition and we're not changing the occupancy, we're not required to comply with the 3,000 square feet that's typically required for a 3-unit building because we're not changing occupancy. Frontage complies as well. The first item that we get to for variance is side yard. Because we are proposing an addition to the rear, we would need to comply with the current regulations in Article 53, which is 2.5 feet in the side yard. The building itself, and we'll see that from the street view in a moment, the building itself actually doesn't have a side yard, and it's permitted to not have a side yard based upon the interpretation of the code. But any addition to the building would actually require the 2.5-foot setback. So on the left side, we're proposing 1.8, and I'll show that in a moment. On the right side, 3.2. The 3.2 allows us to include windows on the right side of the building, but not on the left side. We don't change anything with respect to the front yard because we're not changing the facade of the building itself. We do create a violation of the rear yard, however, and that is a 21-foot setback as measured from our rear decks. 30 feet is the requirement in the district. However, I believe it's Emmett Place is behind our property. So it's not as if we share a property boundary with an abutter. So there is, for all intents and purposes, the ability to have the appropriate setback. It just would actually involve Emmett Place. So a variance would be necessary nonetheless because our property line is not measured at 30 feet from the rearmost portion of the building. The floor area ratio, which I believe everybody, if they don't understand, is the amount of gross floor area that we have in relationship to the amount of land that we have. Currently, the situation is that it's non-conforming. It's at 1.17, which is a pre-existing condition. The maximum that's allowed the district is 1. So because it is pre-existing, we would require a variance for any change or any addition to the floor area. We're proposing to bring that FAR up to 1.7, which is pretty consistent with the building to our right. Actually, it's less than the building to our right and other projects that are in the immediate vicinity. So we're staying pretty much in line with the density of what is on that side of Sumner Street, including the new projects that have been completed. We don't change the height of our building. What I mean by the height, even though we are proposing a roof deck, we're not changing the height of the highest point of the roof currently. We're allowed to be at 35 feet. We're probably just below that as it is, so there's no relief necessary. The open space, we're not required to include any additional open space because we're not changing the occupancy. So the current conditions of open space would be the existing conditions, and therefore no relief would be necessary unless we were adding an additional unit. We're not required, even though we are providing or proposing 1 parking space, we're not required to provide any parking. In this particular case, Article 53 says that if you have a building that predates the zoning, in this particular case, prior to 1993, if it was built before 1993, that it doesn't require compliance with the current code. So therefore, we're not required to have any parking, even though we're renovating the building, and even though we may be increasing the number of bedrooms, there is no parking requirement for the project. So we'll talk a little bit about the parking space that we're proposing to include, and that will be subject to BPDA design review. Next slide, please. Bird's eye view, the building we're looking up Sumner Street towards Orleans, corner of Orleans and Sumner off to the top of the screen. And you can see Orleans as it goes down towards Victory Gardens. You can see the existing building, existing condition. These photos may be a little dated. It all depends on when Google updates it most recently. But if we go to the next slide, we probably get a bird's eye view of the building itself. Yeah. So 270 is identified. It does have, as you can see, this condition in the back of the building that would have to be most likely demolished. You can see the roof is in not very good condition. 272 Sumner Street, which is immediately to our left, is the project that extends back now, probably as much as the building to its left. And that's essentially the setback that we're proposing for our building as well. So just to give you a sort of a perspective of what all of the buildings on that side of Sumner, at least that block, look like, the setbacks are pretty much in line with that newer building. I believe it's at 274 and 276 Sumner. So next slide, please. Just another view of the back. You can see the deteriorated condition of the back of our building. And this would, result in a substantial improvement to the building itself as well as the addition. Next slide, please. Another bird's eye view. Next slide. And here's our street view. The building is the one in the middle. To the right, you do see 272. At the time when it was under construction, or at least under renovation, I believe it's advanced pretty much to the point of almost completion. But just to give you some perspective where we're at. Next slide, please. It's a different view looking up towards Orleans. Next slide. And looking down towards Cottage. Next slide, please. So here's our rendering. At this time, I'm going to ask Sharon to jump in and just talk a little bit about some of the treatments that are being incorporated for the building and some of the changes that we're making. Even though we're not changing the occupancy of the building, the amount of renovations that we are proposing will likely trigger a BPD design review. So Sharon, who is actually very good at understanding what the wants and needs of the BPDA will be, I think is probably hit it out of the park with this project for designing something that will be very consistent with what the city standard is for design. So Sharon, if you talk a little bit about the materials and just some of the things that we'll be doing with the front of the building to improve it, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Richie. So, right now the building has vinyl siding and has sort of irregular windows and sort of two odd entries, one to the building and then another one to a tiny studio apartment. So what we're looking to do is replace the vinyl siding with fiber cement, make the placement of the windows more regular so it matches the other buildings on the street, and then condense the entries into one single entry that would have a small canopy, some nice finishes, some lighting, so that it is a little bit more welcoming and more like the buildings, that are going up around it.
Thank you, Sharon. If we can just jump into the next slide. So here's our site plan. Rachel, I don't know if you're able to zoom in a little bit. I know it's tough to see, but probably give us a little bit of a better understanding of what we're talking about when it comes to the setbacks. That would be helpful. Maybe, yeah, perfect. Right there should work. So what we're seeing here is the proposed addition to the rear of the property. And as you can see on the left-hand side, that 1.8 number is the setback from the building to the property line. The building to our left looks like it is also setback as well. So we're not necessarily, putting it so close to the building next to us that it wouldn't meet the intent of the code. I think there's probably a 3 to 4 foot setback between the buildings, which is sufficient, especially if we don't have any openings or windows on that side. As you can see on the right side, we have a 3.2 foot setback, which is, not only sufficient for egress purposes for, if there were openings on that side of the building for access out of the basement, et cetera, we would have more than enough room. 36 inches, all that's required, but definitely enough room to include windows as well. You can also see towards the back of the property as you come off of Emmett Place, which is a private way and a passageway that we do have rights to under our title to our property. We have the ability to create one parking space. Now, again, as I said in my earlier part of the presentation, we're not required to add any parking. However, this is something that I think we heard during the last presentation. If it would be, if it was possible to incorporate parking, would we look at that? And I think, our client has said, yes, that's something that he will look to incorporate. This, I want to just be as transparent as possible. This is subject to BPD design review. The BPDA may not like this, even though we have the ability to access it. They may feel that this is something that's not necessary. The zoning board may feel the same as well. So even though we are proposing it, it isn't required for the project, but this would be something that would be, I guess for lack of a better term, bonus parking for the site. We do have some buffering that we're showing both sides of the parking space, and that area would essentially be used for parking and a little bit of landscaping. So I just want to make sure I point that out so that if we don't put a parking space, I don't want people to say that we didn't do what we said we were going to do. This is really subject to the board and the BPDA's approval. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'll probably go back to full screen on this, Rachel. Perfect. Yeah, next slide. So just showing some of the existing conditions. We have a basement that is standard, typical with utilities. some storage space, etc. That's really the program. There's really not changing. First floor, you can see, the layout of the first floor, relatively smaller unit. Same thing when you get to the second floor. And then if we go to the next slide, we probably see the third floor layout as well. These are really small units, even though they're 2-bedroom, for example, on the third floor with the living room, a very small galley kitchen. They're not really conducive to the current market for living space for units. So we're hoping to change that a little bit, make this a little bit more functional. And Sharon, if you want to add anything to that, like some of the idea and thought process behind creating a 1,000 square foot unit or 1,100 square foot unit, and what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the goal was to have units that could comfortably fit more residents, but in a comfortable way. So having 2 bedrooms, but having them actually have a decent living space, have a dining space, and access to the outdoors.
Yeah. So if we jump to the next slide, that's probably our proposed existing conditions for elevations. Next slide, please. All right, yeah, so this is just our architectural site plan, shows the extent of the building, the parking space, the landscaping to the back, our decks and our rear egress. Next slide, please. So as I said, the basement, the program doesn't change. We show this as storage, mechanical, etc. Your first floor, you can see how the unit has transformed from the smaller unit that we showed in the previous slides to a more functional, with living space, a larger kitchen, and certainly the bedrooms as well. We want to sort of repeat that as we look up move up the building to the second floor. It's pretty much a similar layout, just some minor changes and jogs in the hallways and whatnot. If we go to the third floor, the next slide, yeah. So again, same thing on the third level, 3-bedroom, and we do have a roof deck that is private for the unit 3. So it is accessible from unit 3 only. It's not part of the common space of the building. So even when we do the condo docs for this project, this is not going to be a larger roof deck that's available for the whole building, just the upper level unit alone. Next slide, please. Showing our front and rear elevations, we have the illustration showing the roof deck. We're proposing, correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, we have a glass rail. We're not proposing the typical balusters. If you can talk a little bit about that design.
Yeah, we are proposing a glass rail at the roof deck to provide transparency. It is set back, I want to say 10 feet from the street edge, so it's not going to be visible from the street, but visibility to the neighbors and just overall.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, just in relation to 272, I mean 272, we would be butting up next to 272 to our right, and that actually is a 4th level. So there's not even, we would be somewhat walled in on the right side of the building, and I don't believe the one to our left has a roof deck or an addition, but this would be somewhat walled in, a little bit more private on the right side. The structure you see is not a head house. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon. That's a hatch access that is angled. I think if we go to the next slide, Rachel, we'll see the profile. Yeah, there we go. So showing the profile, this is looking at the left side of the building. And as I said earlier, we don't have any windows on this part of the addition because it is within 3 feet of the property line. But you can see that profile of that hatch that leads out to the deck is not a full head house, so it is relatively lower profile. It is allowed actually under the zoning code to be used to access a private roof deck. There's a conditional use permit that goes along with that, but that's something that I believe the zoning board does not have an issue with. It's the full head house that presents some problems for them from a design standpoint. So from this profile, you can actually see the rear decks as well. So each of the units get a rear deck, and you can have that egress as well. So next slide, please. This is the right side of our building.
Richard, I just want to check how many more slides you have left, because
I think there's
30 minutes and we were hoping for at least 10 to 15 minutes of questions.
Yeah, no, I think there's like 1 or 2 left. So this is the right side elevation, and shows the deck again. Next slide. Just our process, and next slide. Yeah. Sorry about that, Margaret. I thought I was moving it along.
That's okay. I mean, we did start about 5 minutes late, so I didn't want to rush you too much, but I also want to make sure that we have a chance to give people, the ability to ask as many questions as they would like.
Am I able to recoup my time, the 5 minutes?
Well, let's see how many
I'm
questions. are in the
kidding,
chat.
I'm kidding.
Okay. Let's start with how many
Okay.
questions are in the chat. We'll go for, or butters, actually, is what I should say. My apologies. We start with the butters.
I do have a question myself first. Is there a reason why we can't just do a hatch versus this angled hatch scenario? Because it was done frequently in the neighborhood for a minute there. And now we're consistently seeing these angled hatches, and I'm not knocking the design whatsoever or the illustrations, but they have a tendency to stand out quite a bit more than they're indicated on these plans, because 44 Cottage is a very perfect example where on all of the design plans that we saw in our meeting, these P&Z meetings and also in our monthly meeting, it looked like it was like you couldn't see it at all, and it stands out like a sore thumb when I'm looking at it now.
Yeah.
So I just wonder why we can't do the plain old hatch, because I see 288 Marginal is a perfect example of a property that it's a gorgeous property, and it has beautiful roof decks and has a hatch that's flat. I don't know why we need to have something that sticks up at all.
Sharon, are we able to use that? I hate the term, but I think it's called the casket hatch. It almost looks like, it's flat on the roof.
Right.
And it sort of opens up sideways and you can step out. Is there a reason we can't use that in this instance?
Yeah, I think so. What we've been doing is if we're able to do a straight run stair approaching it, then those types of hatches that are flush work pretty well in terms of getting up there and getting the access. But what we're finding is in cases like this, where there's a winder and you're building within an existing stair, it is too difficult to maneuver up around the winder and get the hatch open. So those are the locations where we're putting a taller head house,
Okay.
or a taller hatch.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Do we know how far back from the street, the front of the building that this miniature head house is?
You can look at that side elevation. I want to say that
Yeah.
it's at least 10 feet, because the deck is 10 feet back.
Okay.
I think it's I think, Rachel, if you can jump back to the side elevation, that may show the distance from the street facade. I don't know if we have time for that, but
Yeah, give me a second. I just have to pull it up.
thank
Okay.
you.
I think you're right, Sharon, because it looked like it was right at the beginning of where the deck started.
Yeah.
So it's most likely 10 feet. Okay. Because all I mean is like, we're always talking about like what we can see from the street and, glass rails and things like that. But then you've got this, like, it's essentially a head house. I know we're calling it not one, but it is. We do have one a butter that has put some messages. Andrew, if you'd like to speak aloud or if you want me to just read your questions, I can do that too. It's up to you.
No, I'm happy to speak, Andrew.
Sure.
Hi all. My name is Andrew. I'm at 17 Everett Street. So I'm a direct abutter to the lead-in of Emmett Place from Everett that this building would be utilizing for the parking spot and potential construction materials. I've been before the board before, just like Attorney Lynds has with his projects, with my concerns about my own property. During the construction of the last two projects up the alley, my house has been damaged multiple times by construction vehicles. So that's one concern. The other is Emmett Place itself is deteriorating. The alley, the pavement, due to all the increased traffic from these buildings coming online. It has resulted in water damage in my basement, in my yard, because there's no drainage anywhere in the alley. So all of these developments add traffic, yet there's no improvement to the access that is degrading due to the increased traffic. So my concern is kind of global going forward with these developments. What any mitigation can be done, in this case. There's no parking currently. There will be parking, additional vehicles. So I'd appreciate some comments there.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Pike, do you want me to respond now, or do you want to wait?
Yes, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. No. So Andrew, yeah, we've spoken on other projects as well.
Yep.
I think that you raise a fair point about the condition of Emmett Place, and I think that's a more global issue for all of the owners of Emmett that have access to Emmett Place, because they are technically the owners of the private way. It's not, one particular person or developer, is responsible for maintaining it. So I think that there's, a discussion to be had. I don't know that this is the forum to do it, with all parties that have access or ownership rights in Emmett Place. There is a process and a procedure for, I don't want to say assessing, but everybody's going to get an agreement, put something in the hat and do something with the maintenance. And certainly there's reason to have that conversation, especially with new owners and developers. But it's not something that can be incorporated as part of a zoning decision, because the zoning board won't even go near those issues. Those are private property issues, not zoning issues. So I think that it probably makes the most sense to coordinate a discussion with all owners on Emmett Place as to those issues about the condition of Emmett Place. As to the drainage issues, this project, because we're putting a pretty good sized addition on this, we're going to have to comply with the Boston Water and Sewer Commission's regulations as it deals with on-site stormwater management, et cetera. So I think we're not doing any harm to Emmett Place based on this project. If there's a separate conversation about improvements that need to happen, my client, obviously being an owner, would participate in that discussion, but that requires cooperation of all owners on Emmett Place for purposes of addressing any maintenance issues.
Andrew Tilton, did you have anything else?
No, and I 100% agree with the larger conversation there. It's, the conversation has to start somewhere, and, when somebody's adding traffic to it, then this seems like a good place to start and offline it, elsewhere.
Yeah.
But, again, my concern remains during your construction at 272, my house was struck, and it was a huge pain for me and my wife to deal with. So again, I would plead with you all to use the front access and not burden me with all of your construction vehicles, which happens repeatedly for, just basically to my detriment.
Okay, there's only one other abutter, Jessica Cord. Did you want to speak? Did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I would just echo Andrew's comments, and it certainly is a broader conversation, but we have had challenges with construction vehicles in the back, and buildings being left open while they're under construction, and then having all kinds of things come from that. So that's certainly not fair to put that all on you, but just again, as Andrew indicated, to be maybe mindful to your owner of just things you can do to keep the peace in the neighborhood, if you will.
My client is on the call, so I'm sure he's taken note of that as well, and I'll make sure I follow up with him on that as well.
We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, and we have quite a few other people on. Is there anyone else who would like to speak aloud? We can take one other speaker aloud. I'm sorry, Frederick, we don't have you as an abutter, so, but you're welcome to speak aloud.
Yeah, so I actually am an abutter. I don't know, I must have not signed up on time, but I live next door at 274, part of the 274, 276 complex. And we've had a lot of issues with 272's project. It's been going on for about 2.5 years. They basically just come in when they've done the construction, used and abused our parking space. And they've also just been bringing in material and construction equipment through Emmett Place constantly, when they said that they were going to do this through the front on Sumner Street. So I want to make sure that, is this construction project, are they going to be doing and bringing material in from the front, or what's the plans for this?
I haven't seen the full construction plan for the project yet. I mean, it's a little premature for that, but you know, I dealt with 272. I know that we discussed limited use of Emmett Place as part of the project. I don't want to, you know, take all the time here tonight to talk about, you know, property rights, but, you know, anybody who abuts Emmett Place has a right of access to their property. You know, reasonable access, of course, you know, being the goal. If construction materials need to be delivered to the property and through Emmett Place is an option, they're entitled to do that. I don't want to suggest that somehow they're prohibited from doing that, or somehow state as part of the project that's not going to happen. And this tonight is about 270. I understand you have concerns about 272, but tonight's about 270, and we're in a planning process for you know, having this heard before the Board of Appeals. So I guess what I can say is that, you know, if there's specific concerns or issues, you know, I'm happy to make, you know, get my clients' contact information to abutters so that you can work through those issues directly. But I can't, you know, say that we're only going to deliver materials through the front of the building, especially if there are challenges with doing that. You know, this is a pretty good size addition that they are proposing. So I don't want to limit it to just the front of the building if that's, you know, if that's not going to be possible.
Okay. I think that we are out of time for this particular project. I would like to say I don't understand why it can't be said that we couldn't just use the front of the building, because there are many buildings where that's the only option. So I don't understand why that wouldn't be a possibility, but and also, I mean, if they're experiencing people parking in their parking spot, like that shouldn't be happening either. But
that's not this project. Andy, that's not this project.
Richard, I understand it's not this project, but obviously it's right next door and there's a potential for the same thing to happen. You were the representative for that project, and apparently I don't have the minutes or anything to reflect on that, but I'm basing this off of what this person has just said, is that it was said at that time that there wasn't going to be anything coming through the back, and then it did. So I can be honest, I don't recall that, Andrew. I don't recall that. I mean, I'm happy to go back and look at my notes too. Yeah, and
the reason I don't recall it is I know Andrew had a number of concerns, and I believe that we were discussing with Andrew, you know, coordination of delivery of materials. And I understand he had some issues with some of the contractors, but I don't think there was an agreement to say we wouldn't access the back of the property. I don't recall that.
So I would just like to point out that my understanding from Emmett's Place, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, if I'm wrong, but that people have had trouble getting tow trucks to come down there before. So I think that the person was trying to point out that if people do decide to start parking back there as part of the project, they don't have the same recourse that they would have if this was a private parking space in a lot that was accessible to a tow truck. So I think it is a reasonable point for them to bring up, is that someone starts using it, there aren't many options for them to pursue. But I do want to follow up with Andrew that he is correct. It is now 7:36 p.m. We do try to get through projects in a half an hour. So just to point that out, Richard, I do see that you're on for 338, 342 Sumner Street.
Yes.
So we're gonna ask you to limit your presentation to 15 minutes, stopping at about 7:50, so that we can have 15 minutes for questions from abutters and members of the community. So this is also just to set things up, 338, 342 Sumner Street. This is also a first presentation of this project to the Planning and Zoning Committee. The proposal is to change occupancy from ground level retail and 4 units to ground level retail and 6 units with renovations and a vertical addition and 2 private roof decks. I assume that you'll explain, I assume that they'll be dedicated to you'll explain this. This will also include a full life safety upgrade and exterior improvements. The developer is one of the Petruccelli family and is listed as the Petruccelli 2018 Irrevocable Trust. They're represented this evening by attorney Richard Lynds. Thank you, Richard. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Margaret. I have 7:37, so I'm going to mark my clock now for 15 minutes, if that's okay. I apologize.
I am fine with that. Let's
All
go.
right, perfect. So thank you. And again, Richard Lynds on behalf of the owners of 338, 342 Sumner Street. With us, I believe, is Anthony Petruccelli, who is one of the trustees. His sister, Deborah Tracy, may also be on the call. This is our first presentation, and I'll get right to it. So we can jump to the next slide. I'm sorry, Sharon Gentris is with us as well. She's also the project architect. So as Margaret said, this is an existing mixed-use building, multifamily dwelling with ground level retail in 4 units currently. Our proposal would confirm and change occupancy to ground level retail with a total of 6 units and a complete rehab of the entire building. This is intended to remain as a rental project. The Petruccelli family, through the trust, will continue to own this. This property has been in the family, I believe, for the better part of probably 60 years, if not thereabouts. Many people who are familiar with this property understand this was his grandfather's store for many years, and then the family has lived in this property for a number of those years as well. So this is an important project for the Petruccelli family, and as I said, this will remain a rental project and is intended to continue being a Petruccelli property. So jump to the next slide, please, and we'll walk through. Quick overview, and it probably doesn't do it justice, so let's jump a little further into, this is probably a good starting place. So what we're looking at here is the intersection of Cottage and Sumner Street. Our building is on the corner. You can see the building that has the 4th level. It's right there, correct? Yeah, right in the corner. It actually has a 3 levels with the ground level retail, 3 levels of residential. And then if we go to the next slide, we probably can see as it wraps around the corner onto Sumner Street. Yeah, here we go. So we're looking at the back of the building. The red pointer is not necessarily pointing at our building, but the building is right in front of that as well. So this building does actually occupy what used to occupy 2 parcels. It is combined as 1 parcel now for purpose of the tax records. So we're treating this as 1 single project, even though these were originally 2 buildings. Next slide, please. Just a different view looking back. We can see the back side of the building if we're looking back towards Cottage Street. Next slide, please. This is a better view. So we can see here, if we're on Sumner Street, or at least bird's eye view from Sumner Street, you can see the building on the left side of your viewpoint here at the corner is the one with that 4th level. And then you have a little over 3 levels as you go up Sumner Street a little bit more towards the, there we go, perfect. Next slide, please. Just a street view. And as you can see here, the lower level has historically been a commercial space, and the upper levels have been residential for a number of years. We do see a fire escape here on the Sumner Street side that will be removed based upon the renovations that we're proposing. But pretty much we're sticking with the existing footprint of the building. We are modifying a little bit of that upper level, which doesn't necessarily set up too well for the program that we're anticipating. Next slide, please. Just another view looking back towards Cottage Street. You can see the building on the Sumner Street side, which has those 2 windows and the air conditioners coming out of the side of the building. That's also part of this project. Next slide, please. So we wanted to contrast these. This is the existing condition of the building as it sits and as it's sat for quite some time. Next slide, please. And I'm going to let Sharon jump in at this point to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we're making here and how that affects the exterior of the building, as well as what we're going to do with the ground level. So Sharon, if you could just jump in quickly, bearing in mind we only have a short window here to walk through this. So if you could just give us some ideas of what we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a funny building because it has sort of 2 fronts and a giant side that faces the main street. And so what we're trying to do is to make it really feel like both sides, the Cottage Street and the Sumner Street side, feel like fronts of buildings. So we've reconfigured the interiors of the units so that now we can have a more regular window pattern. Also, we're looking at opening up a storefront on the 1st floor. We're showing a cafe that doesn't mean that there's going to be a cafe in there, but the idea being that it would be a little bit more open, more transparent. And then the 4th floor above, where there's currently an addition, we're extending it across, so it goes across both buildings. Whereas right now it's just on the 1 building.
Yeah. And we are showing here, you can see the private roof deck for one of the units, and we'll walk through that in the floor plan in a minute. So the visibility of that deck would be visible from the intersection, but we'll talk a little bit about how that lays out when we see the floor plan. So next slide, please. So this is just a good illustration of the lot, because I know it didn't make as much sense probably with the bird's eye view, but you can see there's an L-shaped lot because they are currently combined as one parcel. And as I said, you can see here, it made a lot more sense when it was probably two parcels, but whenever we have these corner lot conditions, we have these very strange configurations of buildings. And in this case, the city has combined these parcels as one tax parcel. So again, we're not expanding the footprint of the existing building itself. It pretty much occupies almost all of the lot already. It's a non-conforming structure. So the only modification footprint-wise, or at least volume-wise, involves the upper level, the fourth level, extending across to the other building. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview. I just incorporate these sometimes we're really close. If you don't necessarily need to zoom in, but just so that we're clear that this is not in a flood zone. It actually is pretty close to the 0.2% zone X, but it's not in a flood zone. So a lot of what we're proposing could be done regardless of any concerns over the resiliency issues that the city is sort of working towards on flood design. But this is the current plan for the 0.2% flood map. Next slide, please. So our zoning, based upon the 3F2000, we are proposing this to continue as a mixed use. It already is a mixed use multifamily. So that was, we would consider that a pre-existing non-conforming use. And the zoning code allows for changes to non-conforming uses under Article 9. So in this case, would be an extension of a non-conforming use because we're not necessarily changing the general principle of use of the building, and that is ground level retail commercial with multifamily residential. Minimum lot size 1,840 square feet. That doesn't change because again, we're not subdividing the lot or adding anything more to the property. 2,000 square feet is the minimum. Because we are adding 2 additional dwelling units, however, that will trigger a variance on lot size. We don't require anything with respect to the lot width, the front yard, the side yard, or the rear yard, because we're not changing anything with respect to those items. However, we do increase the floor area ratio up to about 2.78. 1.35 is what exists. That is non-conforming. And that also probably doesn't take into account other space that already exists in the building, whether that was storage or some other use that's not necessarily picked up by the city of Boston. So we're probably higher than the 1.35, but the city just recognizes about a 1.35 current ratio. So that increase would also require a variance. Height of the building would increase on that other section, not the existing fourth level, up to 40 feet. So we're at 35 feet maximum. So a variance would be necessary for that additional area that we're adding to the fourth level. The open space doesn't necessarily change because the building doesn't change, but because we're adding 2 units, we would require 300 square feet of open space for those units. The roof decks themselves could suffice for the open space, but typically we request the variance for that and ask for the interpretation on the roof decks. Last but not least is parking. Again, the building being a pre-existing non-conforming building with existing retail and existing multifamily, we're only required to add parking for the units that are being proposed. In this case, the 2 additional units would be all that's required for relief for parking. I'm sure as anybody who's been by the site knows, it's virtually impossible to access this site for any parking. It wouldn't be conducive to try to modify the building to include a garage. It would probably disrupt the streetscape pretty significantly. So we're going to ask for the variance for the 2 parking spaces, especially with the close proximity to Maverick T Station. Next slide, please. I'm watching the clock, Margaret. 6 minutes. So our site plan, again, doesn't change much. Existing building stays as is. Next slide. Showing the, this is our existing condition, correct, Sharon? We're showing the area below the Cottage Street parcel is not accessible, storage and utility.
Yeah, I think this is the proposed, but.
Oh, proposed, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
so we do have
there's no
storage
use
and
there.
utility in the lower level on the Sumner Street side, but not accessible on the Cottage Street side. So next slide, please. So as we look at the retail level, 510 square foot retail space, so a modest retail area. We could use that for some type of light food service, professional office, et cetera, but that will continue to remain as retail. We feel that presence on that corner where, you know, the other three corners essentially contain commercial uses. This would, you know, continue sort of in that tradition, if you will, of having that retail anchor that corner for all four of those spaces. Unit B1 is 720 some odd square feet. It's a 2-bedroom. That would be the first level unit access from the Sumner Street side. Next slide, please. We move up to the second level. We have the first residential unit on the, I call it the Cottage Street side, and the second residential unit on the Sumner Street side. So roughly about 615 is almost 700 square feet. Both of those also being 2-bedroom units. Next slide, please. So we get to the third level. Unit A3 is actually a bi-level unit, 3-bedroom. That'll be about 1,090 square feet. And then we look at our third unit on the Sumner Street side, again, 692 square feet, 2-bedroom. Next slide, please. And then we look back at the upper level, and that is essentially the area that's presently on the above the third level on the Cottage Street side. So we're basically reprogramming that as the upper level of the lower, you know, the third level unit to be the bi-level unit with the 3 bedrooms. And then we have unit B4, which is the fourth unit on the Sumner Street side. And you can see that about 792 square feet, also a 2-bedroom unit. Next slide, please. And this shows the orientation of the roof deck. So that roof deck that you saw in the rendering is the one that we're seeing to the bottom left side. That would be visible from the intersection. We are showing that as a skylight hatch, Andrew. We do not propose to incorporate a head house on that because we're able to access that appropriately from the interior of the unit with the right stairwell. I know Sharon talked about that in the last project. Unit B4's deck is pushed way to the back, so it's not even close to the front of the property and barely visible probably from the street, either Cottage or Sumner. Next slide, please. So our elevations, this is looking at it from Sumner Street. So just to get an idea of that upper volume that you see on the Cottage Street building remains. And then we essentially just extend it across to square off, if you will, that fourth level. And then you can see the roof deck from the Sumner elevation. Next slide, please. This would be the, I think this is the back. Sharon, I know it's a little difficult to see, but it's the back. It would be the back of our building, but there's actually two.
Yeah.
This would
You
be
can
if you were
see
looking through, yeah.
Those heavy lines are
Street, right?
ghosted in.
Yeah. So if we're
buildings
looking
on
through
Cottage.
Everett Street, this is what you would see. And then we see the balconies off the back as well. Next slide, please. This would be if we're looking from the Sumner Street side, looking back towards Cottage Street, I believe. Is that correct, Sharon?
It's from the rear of the lot looking towards Sumner Street.
Yeah, and again, nothing changes with the building footprint itself. These are all existing conditions. Next slide, please. And then that was the last one. So so that is essentially the overview for that presentation. Happy to answer any questions or address any comments.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself there. I personally would like to say thank you for keeping the commercial space. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our neighborhood desperately needs it. Let's see. We have a few abutters, but I don't think I saw them in the. All right, if you feel like you're in a butter, raise your hand and I will let you know if you are, and you can go first. Oh wait, Wyatt Larson, you are. No, I didn't see you down there at the bottom. Sorry. If you'd like to speak, you're more than welcome to do so.
I guess, what's the cause for the height increase moving from 35 to 40 feet?
Rachel, is it possible? I don't know if you just want to put the rendering back. It's probably easier to explain. So we have there's an existing height already on the 30 on the Cottage Street building, I call it. So if we're looking at the building now, this area, yeah, that's already there. Essentially, it's to create more continuity in the building because we're essentially incorporating this into one project, you know, and the building appears to have been, you know, somewhat chopped over time. This would sort of bring it and make it a little bit more cohesive. So we're only increasing the building on the Sumner Street side, yeah, exactly, that area there, to make it consistent with what's already existing on the Cottage Street side.
Rachel, are you able to go back to the beginning where it shows the current? Because I think that might be helpful.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So I mean, the appearance architecturally, and I'll let Sharon jump in since she's the pro. This creates sort of a, for lack of a better term, is lack of a rhythm going down the street here. The building itself doesn't seem to flow together very well. It almost looks like two separate buildings. This would bring them together, especially where we're going to be improving that upper level for the one on Cottage Street.
Yeah, and the the building, so to speak, that's on Sumner Street, that fronts on Sumner Street, has a higher first floor. So adding the fourth floor onto that building is the reason why now the height is 40 versus 35, because it has a higher, that part of the building has a higher first floor because of the slope of the sidewalk.
Okay, Gerard Picardi, you're also a butter if you'd like to speak. You don't have to. And then let's see, I think that was the only two that were abutters. Is there anyone else who would like to speak aloud? And then if not, I will move to the questions in the chat if there are any. Feel free to raise your hand or just start speaking. Okay, that looks like we're all set there. I did want to note, I did find the P&Z meeting minutes from November of 2018, where the developer of 272 Sumner did state that he had no intention of using Emmett Place to bring construction materials in through the back. And that if he did do so, he was committed to speaking to the butters directly and keeping JPNA informed of that. So it sounds like that never happened. So I think that's the concern here, is that it was said that it wasn't going to happen and then it did. And now it sounds like you're just not willing to say that it's not going to happen. So,
well, Andrew, I mean, I'm happy to talk to my client about it. Like I said, I mean, we're at this stage of the process. I mean, my job is to, arrange for the approval. If there's a specific issue with Emmett Place, from a, an ownership standpoint or a use standpoint, I don't want to, I don't make those commitments. I can't make that commitment for my client. I'm happy to talk to my client about it, but you got to understand the implication of doing that. And if that means that's going to either, derail the project or make the project not viable, that's an important consideration. And I don't know that I can make that in a community meeting on the first presentation. So I'm happy to talk to him about that. That's a conversation with the contractor. And again, this is all above my pay grade. I really just focus on the zoning approval part of it. So if there's more to the story that needs to be evaluated, then I'm happy to have him review that.
And I will let the abutters that are on the call know that for a project that was happening over on Haynes Street, the direct abutters there worked directly with the developer, and I'm not sure if the contractor or not, but at least the developer, to come up with a plan that they actually all agreed upon and have signed off on in regards to the construction management, parking, things like that. So it's definitely something that can be done. And if you would like to speak to I think Steve Holt would be a great person to talk to, because he kind of head up that scenario, and he might be able to let you know what the best avenues are to get that done with this particular developer, if that's something that you're interested in doing. So feel free to reach out to the board and we can put you in touch with him.
Yeah, I was actually involved in that project, so I know which one that was as well. We just did one recently on 64 Haynes as well. And again, if we're asked to make that commitment, I'm certainly, open to doing that. It's just, I can't just say, no, we're not going to have access in the rear. It's probably better to memorialize something to say, if we're going to have access, this is how it's going to work, or there's some, some structure to it. But I can't just say we're not going to do that without having more information.
Sure. Understood. Last chance for anybody who would like to ask a question on this one. Go ahead, Jessica. Did you have something?
No, I don't want to beat a dead horse. We cannot ask you to commit to never using Emmett Place, but we are respectfully asking you, to work with the people that live back here, because you made a statement earlier that they have the right to be back here, but they don't necessarily have the right to block driveways and park in other areas. That's what we're just asking. Not you personally. We realize.
No, I agree.
We realize you can only do so much.
No,
So
I'll agree with you. They don't have the right to block access.
Your client and the owner to work with us. We'll give you our phone numbers. You've heard from Andrew, you've heard from Fred, you heard from myself. We're happy to work with you. We want to see, you know, the right things done to the neighborhood just in the right way.
Understood. Fair point.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that wraps things up. Margaret? Did we
Thank
lose
you so much. The JPNA board is going to stay after this meeting to discuss what next steps would be for these particular projects. We encourage everyone to watch our webpage, www.jeffreyspoint.org, for the agendas for upcoming meetings. Also, you are welcome to sign up for our newsletter, which comes out twice a month and basically just includes the agenda for either this meeting or the monthly meeting. And that will give you advance notice as it is posted online. As always, the JPNA board is here to assist you. Feel free to reach out to us at board@jeffreyspoint.org. And we thank you for being here this evening and look forward to seeing you again. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Andrew, you can stop the recording.